I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Good.
Good to see everybody on.
We're missing Joy and Kate, I think. I think Joy's coming on.
Joy is on. Jim, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
President Carroll, I just emailed or texted Kate just to make sure.
Okay.
She's trying to get into the meeting, so hopefully.
Okay.
Okay.
There's Kate. I think we have everyone here, Mr. President.
Thank you. I am going to call this meeting to order at 7:04 p.m. All members of the Barrington Town Council are present. And this is a special meeting of the Town Council to engage in a community discussion about policing in Barrington. And we're very fortunate to have Chief DiCrescenzo here to take us through that. Before we do, I'd like to put this in context. And we all remember when George Floyd was murdered on May 25th and how his death really shook the nation, and we felt that in Barrington. At our next meeting, the Town Council felt it was important to convey our confidence in the police department to the people of Barrington. So we asked Chief DiCrescenzo to speak and talk about some of the training that they undergo. He did that. He also expressed the horror shared by every officer in the department at what they'd seen in that video. We just decided, I think as a nation though, that it was maybe time to kind of address our original sin of racism. And I think all of us on this council came to the conclusion that we needed to do more to make Barrington a more welcoming, a more diverse, and a more equitable community. How could we do that? My friend and colleague Steve Boyajian's insight was that the areas where we as the governing leaders of the town could have the most impact were in hiring, housing, and policing. Less directly, but no less importantly, we can help begin and facilitate a community conversation about racism and racial and economic inequality. We've begun that conversation with discussions about the Black Lives Matter flag and other things, and we hope to continue it with things like Vice President Weymouth's listening project. But tonight, we're here to talk about policing. After that brutal and callous and murder of George Floyd by a police officer sworn to uphold the law, there were calls from some in our town to eliminate all funding from our department. I understand and I understood the frustration and anger at the fact that too many Black and brown Americans are killed by police in our country. And then there were some who wanted to blindly defend the police. And I understand the desire to defend those who defend the people we love. But the people who think the police can do no wrong have missed the point, just as those who think all cops are bad have missed the point. The real issue, in my view, is how we reconcile the need for a police force with the fear that giving some enormous power, the power to legally use force, sometimes even lethal force, how can we do that without leading to an abuse of that power? In looking at our police department and at other departments, I've come to believe that the answer is an ethos of professionalism. That's what we see in the Barrington Police. Certainly we're fortunate in that we have a better than highly educated police force. All of our police officers have at least a bachelor's degree. Some have masters, and I think 2 have law degrees. But I think that professionalism is the answer. A profession's an occupation where competence is a moral necessity. An incompetent surgeon can obviously kill a patient. And policing is that way as well. An incompetent police officer is an immoral police officer. And so what do professionals do? They make sure that they hire the right people, and they constantly work on their profession, improving their profession, learning new things as new things come up. I can't imagine, my youngest is now out of the house. I can't imagine having to keep up with social media like the detectives at the Barrington Police Department do. All the new things, because there are threats coming from those and expressed on those. Real threats to Barrington High School that they need to follow up. They constantly train and work on de-escalation and many other things. And that's because they're professionals. So it's that professionalism that makes them open to criticism. Whenever, it's been my experience that when I suggest something to the police department that I think is a good idea, often they're already doing it. 6 years ago, I suggested anti-bias training. They've been doing it. I suggested de-escalation training. They've been doing it. They are really working on it. But they're, I'm sure as a professional, open to new ideas and learning about things. One last thing I would say, it is important that we examine our police force closely because we grant them enormous power. But we also have to kind of examine ourselves as we go through this process. In Barrington, we want to make sure that we scrub the racism out of our police force so that we don't have to worry about that kind of bias affecting a police officer acting in his or her duty. We need to also make sure that that bias is outside of us. And so as part of what we did, we, as a community and as a council with our manager and our police chief, took a commit to action pledge. All of us signed this pledge, and you'll see this as a slide in Chief's presentation. And part of that was to examine our use of force policies and examine the history of our police department, and part of it is to engage in a community discussion. So we're taking that step tonight. I am more confident in our police department after spending some time learning about it than I was before. We are very fortunate to have a very professional chief who cares deeply about this town and cares deeply about his officers. And I want to thank them. And I will invite Chief DiCrescenzo to begin his presentation. Thank you.
Am I on now? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Jim. The first thing I'd like to just introduce who's here with me. I'm at police headquarters, and with me is Captain Timothy Harrington. He's in charge of he's second in command, and is in overseas patrol and the detective division, and also handles our prosecution in district court and our traffic court. Also with me is Lieutenant Kevin Igo. He's in charge of the patrol division. And we also have Lieutenant Josh Burrell, who's in charge of the detective division, or the criminal investigative division, and those that are in the plain clothes division in the Barrington Police Department. As our council president alluded to back in on June 8th, I was asked to quickly give a little presentation as to what we do at the Barrington Police Department to promote professionalism and in hopes of not having any incidents like we've seen recently nationally. And in that presentation, for those that maybe were not present during that council meeting, I'll try to quickly, not too quickly, but briefly go over some of the areas that I addressed. And in that presentation, I concentrated on 4 areas. One was training. Number 2 was the state accreditation. 3 was what's known as an early intervention system or an early warning system. And the 4th area was recruitment. And with that said, I'll go over those 4 areas to start tonight, and then we'll get into a little more of use of force policy. I've chosen some excerpts from our policy based on some questions that we received via email since the incident, since the national incident in last May, earlier May, I should say earlier this year. And there were a lot of questions that are being asked nationally, locally, and statewide as well. And with that said, we'll go over some use of force statistics and also some traffic stop statistics that I think everybody's interested in seeing tonight. So to begin, I'm not in control of my slides, so bear with us. Thank you. So the first slide is the pledge that we all signed, the town council, myself, and our town manager. And you see the 4 bullet points that we pledged to review the Barrington Police Department's use of force policies, engage the community, which we're doing tonight, and we will, I'm sure we'll have additional meetings to engage the community, hopefully someday in person at the town hall again. The 3rd bullet, report the findings to the community as well, and then reform the Barrington Police Department use of force policies as necessary. I'll get into a lot of that later as to who's actually reviewing our model use of force policy during the last couple of months. And if we can go on to the next slide. Quickly, it's just a quick slide on our mission statement. You can see in our mission statement, we pledge and we're committed to working as a partnership with our community to provide the best quality police services for safe and secure living environment through professional, fair, and compassionate law enforcement services based on integrity and respect for all citizens. If we could move on to the next slide, Caroline. As I already said, the 4 areas that I spoke about on June 8th council meeting, one of the areas was recruitment. And I think it's imperative and important to, first and foremost, we have to hire the right people. And in order to hire the right people, we try to find those recruits or people that have the right attitude, beliefs, values that are needed in order to be successful in this career. It's a tough occupation. They go through a written test, an oral interview, a 3-member panel oral interview, both that consist of civilians, human resources director in town, and some police officers. And then there's a second interview that includes human resources, the town manager, the chief, myself, and generally that's it. There may be a few others added in the current process coming up. There's a physical fitness test they have to take, a thorough background interview and investigation. It's very thorough. We go through neighborhoods, previous neighborhoods they lived in. Even if they don't live there presently, we look at high school, sometimes grammar school, believe it or not. But we go back as far as we can. We check social media as well. And then they have a lengthy psychological test and interview. In addition in the recruitment section, I'd just like to turn it over quickly to our human resources director, Marianne Oliveira, so she can inform you the last at least 5 or 6 years during our recruitment process, what we've done to try to find qualified individuals and more diverse candidates. And Marianne, I don't know if I saw you on earlier, if you could just add, what we're doing currently in the recruitment phase as far as diverse candidates.
Sure. We reach out to Rhode Island and Southeast Massachusetts colleges and universities that have criminal justice programs. We reach out to the minority community. We reach out to organizations, student organizations within the universities. This recruitment alone, we reached out to 38 community organizations that then spread the word to their population. we recruited on the minority register. This went out every recruitment period. It goes out full force to everyone. We've set up shop at Bristol Community College of Rhode Island, where we've set up a booth. We set up a booth at New England Institute of Technology. So we're very, very active in the community in recruiting for police.
All right, thank you, Mary Ann. And that 38 agencies were minority agencies, right, or organizations?
Correct, yes.
All right, in addition to the recruiting and all the examples I already said, we all know that they have to attend a 22-week police academy. That kind of goes over all the same things again. You know, there's a lot of training in the academy, and like I said, it's almost 6 months long. So in addition to all the recruitment things we do, they also have to pass that academy. The next area I'd like to talk about is some of the training we have, and you can see on your screen, it's quite extensive. This is not all the training, but I just listed some of the ones that are applicable to what we're talking about tonight. And as the president of our town council mentioned when he checked in with us, he noticed for years now we've been teaching ethics, non-bias-based policing, unconscious biases, implicit bias. I mean, we learned that, you know, a lot of our biases are not even known to us. You know, we don't know that we're actually, it's unconscious as it says. So I think it was important, some of that training. De-escalation training is very important. We just sent an officer to de-escalation instructor training. That was just a couple of weeks ago. So it's very current. And that office is now, so we have someone on board within our own department that can train, which I think was very important, especially in light of the recent events. So not only did we used to train in it, now I think it's going to be much better. We have an officer here that can instruct the rest of us, and he can pass on and deliver what he has learned at the recent training in light of the recent happenings. So I'm sure that training was modified a little bit based on recent events. So we'll be training in that coming up in the next month. We were one of the first departments to reach out post George Floyd incident. I purposely reached out to the Rhode Island Commission on Prejudice and Bias, and they were actually elated to hear from me when I talked to them in June. I believe it was early June. And we were one of the first departments. We have already trained with them on some implicit bias, some hate crimes training with them. The entire department went, including our civilian employees, in July and August. We finished up. There was 4 different training sessions with them. We have the Path of the Guardian. You'll notice one of the last bullets. I think it's been very successful. That's a weekly program that we engage in, and that's 20 to 30-minute videos that the officers watch here at the station. At times, they'll take a short question and answer after watching some of those videos, and they have to sign off after they watch the video that they went through the trainings. Those trainings, like I said, is 1 a week, 52, so it's quite a bit of trainings. That also includes bias training, use of force training, search and seizure laws. It's put on by a Daigle law firm who has experience in police work, and he's an attorney as well. So he'll give us a lot of the interpretations from the Supreme Court's decisions throughout the nation that are constantly coming in and changing as from monthly, sometimes weekly. We could move on to and actually, I'll mention one more there, the less lethal training. Obviously, whenever possible, officers always try to go less lethal. And that's why we carry OC or pepper spray and a taser and a baton. And the taser, a lot of people have some adverse thoughts about the taser, but I could go over, in the use of force section that we'll get to later on in the presentation, that it has really saved lives. We've been to many calls where people have knives in their possession, and if not for having a electronic control weapon or a taser, we would have to resort to our sidearm or our firearm. So less lethal training is very important. We can move on to the next slide. And I think I went over this enough, but the de-escalation training, I talked about, this is up there because I took a section out of our model use of force policy, that says when safe under the totality, the second bullet there, all officers, if time and circumstances permit and the totality of the circumstances are taken into account, if we can, we will actually use de-escalation tactics as opposed to using force. That's the first thing we're trained to do. I mentioned the last bullet already that we sent someone to a recent 3-day active de-escalation strategies instructor training. And you see the 3 bullets of what was taught in that class, and that officer will be relaying that and providing the rest of us with that training very soon. And we can move on to the next slide. Accreditation is extremely important. I talked about this, like I said, back on June 8th as well at the council meeting. We are a state accredited agency. We were just reassessed in 2019, the end of last year. We were probably in the top 10 departments that were reassessed, meaning there's still some departments that haven't even reached formal assessment initially yet, and we're on our second, third year assessment stage. So 2016 was our first accreditation, which went over 3 years prior to 2016, and then in 2019 we were reaccredited. We have 113 formal written policies. We have 90 sections, that's not listed on there, but 90 sections in our rules and regulation handbook that all officers must follow and they're held accountable to. It mentions the 200 industry standards of best practices that the accreditation holds us accountable to. And if you think about all the subsections of the 200 industry standards of best practices, that means it's almost 600 best practices or industry standards that we must follow. The thing to remember about the accreditation process, it's an independent auditors and assessors that come in. It takes place over a couple of weeks. Off-site, they'll go through all our policies, all our proofs. We have to prove that we're following each standard. And then they'll also make an actual on-site assessment. They come to the building. They're here for pretty much 1 day on site. They'll check the property room, the cell blocks, and everywhere in the station, in the police headquarters. There's one other thing I wanted to mention about accreditation.
If I could jump in real quick.
Go ahead, Jim.
With in regards to accreditation, it's important to point out that the whole process is very, very thorough. But more importantly, our insurer, the Interlocal Trust, has put such an emphasis on this process and the value in this process through their actuarial reviews that if you are an accredited police department, your liability insurance deductible is $2,500. If you are not accredited, your deductible is $50,000. And I think that is a testament to someone from the outside looking in at this accreditation process and the value that they put in it. And I'd like to say that Barrington was one of the first accredited, and I think the first that had 2 accreditations in 2 accreditation cycles as we work towards our 3rd. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, we were, I would say in the reaccreditation, just to go with what Jim said, I don't want to mislead anybody. We were in the top 10 for the second reaccreditation in 2019. And one other thing about accreditation I'll get to later, but I want to mention it now in case I forget. Just as one example, accreditation, it's mandatory for us to report any use of force incidents. And prior to that, in 2015, we never had a report to report use of force. And in the accreditation manual, I'm looking at it here, it says whenever an officer uses force that results in death, injury, or even an allegation of injury, even if it's just an allegation of injury, we have to do a reportable use of force. It's an actual document we fill out. In addition to that, anytime we draw a firearm, we take a firearm out, even if it's not fired or used, we'll have to do a use of force report. And in addition to that, and even if you take our taser out, we have to do a use of force. Even if the taser or electronic control weapon is not used, just the fact that we take it out and point it at an individual, will have to do a lethal force, not a lethal force, excuse me, a reportable use of force form. And that's because of accreditation. And I think that's what the important part is. And that's only one little standard that I'm mentioning tonight because I think it's applicable. And it's very important because that use of force report is filled out that day or that right after the incident. That's handed to the supervisor who reviews it, who in turn turns that up the chain of command to the lieutenant who reviews that. And then the captain will also look at it. And then annually, we have to do a use of force evaluation and analysis. And that comes from the chief level or somebody I designate, but I'm always involved. So there's a bunch of steps there that reportable use of force form goes through. And that's all because of accreditation. We didn't have that prior to, in the earlier years. And I just wanted to make sure I mention that now before we probably mention it quickly again in the end of the presentation. And we can move on. So that last section I mentioned, I told you there was 4 sections I talked about on June 8th. And the last one is the EIS system or an EWS system. Called an early warning system. I prefer to call it an early intervention system. And the reason for that is most of the information put into this software that we have called the Guardian Tracking has mostly good things. So every time an officer, like I know the town council recently has mentioned a few incidents of emails I've received about officers, doing a great job with some different populations that we have in town. And that's put into this system here. And it recognizes rewards, recognition, good or bad performance. So instead of calling it's not always a warning system, it's just an intervention system. It's very important. One of the national questions that came out of the recent happenings is, does your police department have an early warning or early intervention system? And the answer here is yes, we do. We've had it for a few years now, and we're getting better at it. And it really helps out when it comes to doing evaluations. And another thing about accreditation, although we've always had it since I've been here, our annual evaluations. A lot of police departments do not have annual evaluations. A lot of companies got away from it, I heard in the past, but we do have it, and we have to have it because of state accreditation. And this helps us in our evaluation process annually. At the bottom, you'll notice it's kind of vague, but it says officer termination. A lot of the questions nationally also involve someone asking, are there a certain number of incidents or bad performance that an officer has to make in order to be terminated? And the answer is simply no. One bad incident may result in termination. Numerous moderate or minor incidents could result in just discipline and then ultimately termination. And that's our early intervention system, or early warning system. And that's, like I said, one of the big questions nationally now is that they want every department to have that. And I'm going to venture to say that, I don't know, even if half have that throughout the nation.
Chief, before you move on, for those folks who were not with us at our June meeting, Chief also talked about an article that he authored back, I think, in the 1990s, and it was on this same topic. Chief, could you describe that article? That was in the National FBI handbook or magazine or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I published an article. It was in 2000, I think 2006, 2005, somewhere around there. And it was published in the professional journal, so the FBI Law Enforcement Journal, that's worldwide distributed. And it was also became a chapter in a college textbook that was used in universities and colleges called, the name of the college text was Current Issues in Criminal Justice. And it was a chapter in that about back, 15 years ago when I wrote it. It was that becoming popular, not popular, but they were saying most departments need to have an early intervention system or an early warning system. And if you Google it, you can find it under my name, or if you Google early warning systems in the FBI Law Enforcement Journal, it's in there. And a lot of it is applicable. And I think, Mike, you read it and you made some comments to me about it, and I appreciate that. But a lot of it was applicable to what we're seeing today and how, and I guess the crux of it is, unfortunately, a lot of we know officers make small little mistakes, and if they're not addressed, they tend to grow, and it's sometimes, not often, but it's that one in 100 case where that officer becomes so badly, what's the word I'm looking for? He becomes somewhat of an actual liability and ends up doing something where he or she gets fired, and in hopes that the early warning system would stop that. If things are addressed early enough and caught early enough, and these software systems like our Guardian tracking makes that a little better, makes it a little easier to find. But hopefully that's the point of it. So you see those trends. You might see trends, and trends can be, sometimes you'll notice an officer just has a disproportionate amount of disorderly conduct arrest, which is kind of an arrest that could be initiated by officer only. And if for some reason that officer, you look against what other officers are doing, and based on that officers and other officers work, how much work they're doing, it can show a trend where maybe something's up with that officer. And there's a lot of other examples, but that's just one, and that's what the article was about. I won't go any further on it. If that answers your question, Mike, or is that good?
It did. Thank you. I just, I thought folks should know that our chief actually wrote the book on this.
Yeah, I don't know that, but I didn't write the book. But I did get a lot of calls nationwide from chiefs after they read that article because they would pique their interest. And tonight, now that we finished what I think my initial June 8th presentation was about, tonight I think everybody's interested in the use of force policy, right? So currently, I mentioned earlier that it's being reviewed by 3 agencies, and one is the Rhode Island Attorney General's office, as it has in the past. The Rhode Island Interlocal Trust, for those that don't know, that's our insurer. They insure, I'm going to say all but maybe a handful of municipalities in the state of Rhode Island. So they're very interested, obviously. I mean, if there's a use of force incident, they're the ones that are going to have to be involved and handle, any lawsuits that we have. And if there is a payout on a lawsuit, they're the unfortunate ones that'll have to pay out. So they're involved in looking at the policy, and I think rightfully so. And obviously, knowing their interest, that they have a lot to say about it, because, like I said, they're the ones on the hook for the money if there is, in fact, an excessive force lawsuit or use of force by us. And the last being the Rhode Island Police Accreditation Commission. And when you look at those 3 agencies, after the George Floyd incident and maybe some of the other national incidents of recent, many looked at and had questions, right, about use of force. And they said, can you shoot at a moving vehicle? Can you use chokeholds? And when we looked at a lot of those questions, at least when I looked at them, we'd noticed that current model use of force policy, based on these 3 agencies that reviewed it back in, I think it's every 3 years they're looking at it, we've already kind of fit and already had all those questions answered in Rhode Island. And nationally it might be different. Maybe it's kind of a test. Maybe it's because we're a little smaller state. I don't know, but we're kind of ahead of the curve on the use of force. And the reason, I think, is because of the Police Accreditation Commission, in addition to those other 2 agencies that already came out with a model policy. And with that said, even though most of the boxes were checked off based on the current climate and the questions that were being asked by nationally, the 3 agencies currently are in review. And I just got an email today that draft is now out, still under review, but I'm going to assume in the next couple of weeks we're going to see the final draft. So even though we were kind of a model policy already for the nation, we're going to have an updated model policy, I'm sure, with some changes based on some of the local sentiment throughout the country, based on some of the recent happenings. So that's where our current use of force policy is. We will be posting it on our website. We haven't yet because we knew it was under further review and going through a lot of scrutiny right now. And we can move on to our next slide. Try to keep up here. So the next couple of slides, next several, are pieces from our use of force policy and how we came up with these. Some of the, actually everybody present contributed. Lieutenant Burrell, Lieutenant Igo, Captain Harrington, Detective John Scagliotics had something to do with this. What happened was I was getting emails, as you can imagine, from people all over the country, not only in Barrington, and asking questions. And I'm going to pose the question. It's not on the slide, but the reason for the slides are the result of me answering questions online. And I had our officers look at our policies and actually take excerpts from our policy to answer the questions that people were asking. And I got a question that said, are the police officers in the Barrington Police Department forbidden from using carotid restraints, chokeholds, strangleholds, etc., and hog tying methods? And then further they went on, are they forbidden from transporting civilians in uncomfortable positions such as face down in a vehicle? Now we all know where these questions are coming from. So we had an officer look this over and they came up with this excerpt from our policy. And that's the section, and it's cited there on the slide. Techniques intended or designed to cut off the blood flow or oxygen to the brain will not be used unless lethal force is authorized. Now it's not used. This is more restrictive than just putting in a stranglehold or a chokehold. We couldn't use this, and this was already in our model policy, and that's what I was alluding to earlier. So I'm sure now, I think I did look at the draft briefly. They actually name chokeholds, strangleholds, but when you read ours, it's even more restrictive. I mean, any technique that's going to cut off blood flow or oxygen, you cannot use unless the officer is in dire straits and his life is in, or someone else's life is in danger. Other than that, we do not use them. I don't remember any being used recently. And like I said, we always resort to less lethal before we go to lethal force. Then our next slide, lethal force. So I had a question that came in under that same, and maybe this wasn't a question, but out of our use of force policy anyway, when can we use, it may have been a question, when can the police use lethal force? And the only time we can use lethal force comes out of a Supreme Court case and a standard out of the Supreme Court that has developed through the years. And it's all based on anything that's objectively reasonable. Force that is objectively unreasonable. And that changes based on the circumstances and the situation the officer finds himself in. So he can use lethal force to protect him or herself, another officer, or any other person that the officer believes is in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, or prevent the escape of a fleeing violent felon who the officer has probable cause to believe will pose a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others. If we go on to the next slide, this developed out of a question, again, that someone asked, whether the police officers in Barrington are required to intervene if they witness another officer using excessive force. Will officers be reprimanded if they don't intervene? We all know why that question is asked in light of what happened in May of this year. And duty to intervene, that's a section on your slide that actually comes right out of our model use of force policy in Rhode Island. So all officers present and observing another officer using force that is clearly beyond that which is objectively reasonable under the circumstances shall, when in a position to do so, intercede and prevent the use of such force. If they don't do that, and they do have to report it to a supervisor as soon as possible if they were and they did have to intervene. And as always, we note at the bottom, any willful, negligent violations of the department policy will result in disciplinary action to an officer. So that answers both questions. That was posed by someone online. So they will be reprimanded if they don't intervene, and yes, they should intervene. And I think it's very clear in the incident we're all thinking about, that's just without question, yeah, someone has to intervene. If we go on our next slide, I was posed another question via email. Are the officers of the Barrington Police Department trained to perform and seek necessary medical action or render aid after using excessive force. We always have to render aid, even if we don't use the excessive force. If we come upon a scene, we always render aid if someone's injured, whether it be by force from us or anyone else. And that's an excerpt from our policy, for section C-3, providing first aid. You can see there that we have to provide it. And if you're willful, negligent, violate that policy, you can be disciplined and reprimanded. Again, hopefully I'm not going too fast. Another question posed, are the police officers in the Barrington Police Department forbidden from shooting at moving vehicles? And that's another part excerpt from our use of force policy. And we are forbidden from using our firemen unless it's utterly impossible not to. And what we even go further to say, our officers shall try not to place themselves in any position where a vehicle may be used against them. So we try not to get ourselves into that position to start with, so we don't have to resort to that. And we also go further to say, if that vehicle is driven at you, try to escape from the path of an oncoming vehicle. And we had this in the past. Well, since I've been here, this has happened. We had an officer that had to get out of the way. He was struck with the side view mirror of a car. He did draw his weapon, but he did not fire. And the reason being, he was able to get out of the way prior to that vehicle. It did strike him, but it was with the side view mirror. So it's a little different than getting hit straight on by the car. So and other than that, I can't remember any of us shooting at a moving vehicle in my 34.5 years. There's another question posed, and I'm sure you've all heard it nationally. Is there a clear and enforced use of force continuum that details what weapons and force are acceptable in a wide variety of civilian police interactions? And it goes on to say, are the officers in the Barrington Police Department required to exhaust every other possible option before using excessive force? In a nice world, yes, we would like to be able to exhaust every option before using lethal force, but obviously it depends on the circumstances, right? So if an officer pulls up to a situation where there's an active shooter already shooting, I don't think that officer is going to be too successful in trying some of the other de-escalation, de-escalation methods when there's already an active shooter. So I kind of look at our use of force policy as having a continuum, but it's non-linear. So you don't have to start, in a pyramid, such things. Depends on what they're confronted with. And again, we'll go back to the definition of objectively reasonable as force. And that's what the Supreme Court, it's a standard that they hold police officers accountable to. And, that's something that's been in case law for a while now. We can move on to our next slide. This is some of the definitions that come out of our use of force policy. You'll see that, we'll use physical strength and skills, verbal commands. We always try verbal first when you talk about, building up in a pyramid fashion, if you can do that, because you're in a situation where maybe someone has a weapon, but they haven't, maybe it's in their belt line and they haven't drawn on that yet. So we're going to try to, talk that person down or drop in the weapon before they do pull it out and actually, point it at someone or come at, if it's a knife or something like that. Maybe it's just in a waistband, and you can use all these other command presence. Sometimes that works. Verbal commands, physical strength and skills, and then you got your OC spray, your impact tools, and then your taser. And that's just definitions out of our use of force policy. In our next slide, verbal warning was a question, again, posed via email in light of everything going on. And the question was, are the officers in the Barrington Police Department required to give a verbal warning to civilians before drawing their weapon or using excessive force? And section 2 there from our policy says, when feasible, police officers will identify themselves and state their intention to use deadly force. And we were at the firing range every year in my 35 years when we're confronted with a threat and we're qualifying, we have to draw out our weapon and yell, "Stop, police." So we do identify ourselves, and it's something we practice on the firing range consistently. And it's almost, I mean, I wouldn't be able to take my weapon out and point it without yelling that, I don't think, because it's so ingrained in my training. So that's the answer to that question about drawing your weapon and giving a warning by the police. So requirement to report threat or use of force. I touched on it already, the requirement that the accreditation process holds us accountable to, even if there is no injury, just pulling the weapon out, whether it be a taser or a firearm, we have to do a use of force report. This slide came out of a question that was posed again by someone online and said, are the officers in the Barrington Police Department required to report each time they threaten to or use force on civilians? And the answer is yes. And maybe the threaten to is just having the taser out, even though we don't use it or fire the taser, we'll still do a use of force report because we use that to gain compliance. And that's an excerpt from our policy again. So we notify a supervisor without unnecessary delay when reportable force is used, either on duty or off duty. And then they'll fill out that report, and that'll go up the chain of command, like I explained already, based on accreditation standards. All right, yeah, we can move on. Talking about civilian deaths, we had a question. Actually, it wasn't a question, it was a recommendation that was emailed to me and said, I would like to see the Barrington Police Department collect and report data on civilian deaths that occurred in custody and as a result of an officer's use of excessive force. That is already done. We do, matter of fact, any death in custody has to be reported to the Attorney General's office, and there's a process in place that involves our agency working with the state police and the Attorney General's office to investigate any in custody death. Even if someone hangs themselves or hurts themselves, and we had it once, that's probably not mentioned on here, but I do know of a hanging in the cell in the old police station, and that has to be investigated, even though the person hung themselves in the cell. Our new cells, hopefully that can't happen. They're designed much differently than the old police station was. But I think it was important because people were asking about, you know, any deaths. You'll see in yellow there the top sentence. Let me explain that. The no recorded deaths as a result of excessive force. I find that in the questions I've been getting via emails, a lot of people are using synonymously the term excessive force and lethal force, and they're not the same. I mean, excessive force can be as simple as punching someone in the face, maybe excessive, depending on the circumstances. So an officer can use a force that really doesn't cause any serious injury, but could still be deemed excessive based on our policy. So but in any event, there's never been a death since that I can remember in 34.5 years of as a result of an officer using excessive force. There have been 2 deaths at the hands of officers. You notice listed there at the bottom of the slide, but that was justified force or lethal force, otherwise known as deadly force. And that was reviewed by a grand jury on both of those cases and found that the officer acted appropriately. And the first one was in the 80s when we had a bank robbery on County Road at the People's Bank. Yes, it was People's Bank at the time, where the current Bank Newport is located. And the gentleman that robbed that bank went into the back neighborhood and was approached by Sergeant Ashman, who's now deceased. And he had a handgun, and he was unfortunately, shot by one of our sergeants. And then in 1999, we had an officer involved. This is a call that was a Barrington resident. The family said the gentleman was mental health issue or suicidal at the time, left with a handgun. They were concerned. They knew that something was wrong. They were worried about his well-being, and we ended up finding that person on the East Providence line. East Providence police were first on the scene within minutes of the family calling. It wasn't too far from the gentleman's home. The 51-year-old white male who pulled the gun and actually pointed it at one of the East Providence offices, and his life was taken. So those are the two that I know of, in the last 40-something years that were unfortunate, but were justified lethal force uses by Barrington police officers. Both were white males, one 21 and one 51 years old. If we go on to the next slide, I just wanted to mention briefly the 20 for 20. For those of you that aren't familiar, every police chief in the state of Rhode Island signed on, almost like the pledge that we showed earlier that the town council and myself and the town manager signed. We signed on to 20 for 20. So it's 20, I don't know how, let's see, 20 areas that we pledged to work on throughout the state, every police agency. We went over this earlier today. We met with the town manager today, and he was asking me where we stand on them. I mean, the first three were just statements. So if we can go to the next slide, 4 through 20 are actually things that we agreed to work on, and we're over half in the Barrington at least already. I can comfortably say probably more than that, but and many of which, because of our use of force model policy, helped us out on a lot of the sections. But we offer the right to peaceful protest, and I think most people on tonight, including the town council who are present at most of them, we've had, I don't know how many protests already this year, maybe at least 6 or 7 that I've been to, including the last one Saturday here at the police station. We have given everybody the right to a peaceful protest. As a matter of fact, we've gone a little above and beyond, in my opinion. We had some of the protesters take up lanes of travel recently Saturday, and previous to that on County Road at the town hall. We were very patient. When they were finally asked to move, they did so in front of the town hall. You don't want to obstruct traffic, even though they were doing that at times. But so we definitely offered number 4. We've been offering the right to peaceful protests, journalist rights, and officer. We never had an issue with giving journalists their rights to their reporting requirements. We're going to post our use of force and other policies on our website. We had a meeting today. We are updating our website. We're going to a different platform. The previous platform was very difficult to use and very difficult for us to keep up with. Our new one is going to allow our SRO, sorry about that acronyms I know we tend to use, but our school resource officer is very proficient in social media. He handles our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram accounts now, and he's going to become very involved in our website so we can do a lot of these things that are required now under my pledge under the 2020 campaign. We'll put our new use of force model policy and our other policies out on our website for public view at any time they want, in addition to many other things that we're going to put out there. Many of these questions that I was reading to you tonight on these slides, we put together in a document with the help of everybody here in our detective unit. We're going to post that online. It's like an 8-page document, frequently asked questions in light of the recent happenings and our answers to them. And we'll post that on our website as well. Number 7, we all agreed to all become an accredited department. We have already reached that, so that makes that easier for Barrington to reach number 7. There are, like I said, the last I knew, almost 18 departments that still are not state accredited. So they have more work than we have to do to meet these 20. Feedback, that's already on there. What that means is somewhere on our website, there's an area where they can contact us. It goes to my email. I'm going to try to broaden that. We talked about that today. I'll work with our email company and try to maybe, because I can only put one email on our website that it goes to, but if we do it in a generic email that'll go to 3 or 4 of us, I think it'll be better than me just getting them as I am now. but I do get feedback all the time, good and bad. And that's what that number 8 stands for. So we covered that already. 9, I don't want to get into too much because Kate will take over the meeting. And restorative justice is, we do, I think, do a little bit of that with the JHB. We make a pledge to try to work with our court system and our prosecutors to try to bring more restorative justice into the process of prosecution. Research body and cruiser cameras. We all agreed to research it. I am on the chiefs of police have a committee. There's about 8 or 10 chiefs now on it, and I currently am sitting on that committee. And it's an eye opener. And my concern is not even the cost. They laugh when I say that, but they think Barrington has a lot of money, and that's not what I meant by it, but it's the work involved. Newport Police has had body cameras just in a small percentage of their patrol unit over the last 3 years, I believe it is, and obviously the Providence Police. So they have a lot to offer to the rest of us on the issues, on all the issues that involve body-worn cameras. And the Newport chief was the part that scared me to death, and the one that I've always been worried about with body-worn cameras, because we all want them. But he said that he could conceivably see needing 4 police officers just in a unit that would have to be connected to just body-worn cameras, and that means redaction of film. You don't realize, I never thought of it, every mental health call you go on, or every domestic violence call you going into people's houses, that's all going to be on camera. Anybody that's caught on camera that's a juvenile will have to be redacted or blurred out. And he said from his experience, it's just a lot of man hours. And I had it written down, but it scares me to death because we just don't have the man hours to do what we're doing now. I talk about accreditation. Most departments have a full-time accreditation officer or manager, whatever you want to call that officer. We do it part-time. How we do it, I don't know. The other police agencies laughed at me. They laughed at my people that go to the accreditation meetings, that they're 2 days in patrol to sergeant and 2 days in use of force, where they can just work on use of force, 2 days in accreditation, and they laugh. They don't know how we're doing it with 2 days. But never mind, getting the body-worn cameras and just the work involved and the man hours and the storage. But on a short note, essentially what I've learned so far is it's about $1,200 annually for each officer to maintain and keep up with the body-worn camera. That's about the cost factor annually. And that includes storage and everything. Officer wellness and mental health. We got some things we're doing through the Police Chiefs Association with that. And in addition, I think our Human Resources Director has just reached out to a new EAP company, Employee Assistance Program. So that kind of covers us for 11. I will read. Obviously, each bullet point has a description in my manual that I have, and we'll go over that. But I think we're meeting a lot of number 11 already. Social Service Mutual Aid Database. That's just a database we're putting on, I think, on our state website, the Chief's website.
If I could interrupt for 1 second.
Yes.
For the sake of moving along, I think if people can refer back to these points if they have questions on them. I think a lot of them you've already covered, but I'd like to move to the statistics because I think they're very telling and important for people to recognize, and I want to get to them before they decide to watch the debate or something.
I will do. I'll wrap it up in 30 seconds, Jim.
Thank you.
The 14 face-to-face interactions, that's what we're doing tonight. We agreed to have community forums, so this helps us out tonight. We're probably one of the first departments to actually get number 14 going, thanks to the town council. I thank them because that helps me out. Bill of Rights, obviously, we're going through that now, right? We have a chiefs panel. I'm not on that panel, but they'll be reviewing the Bill of Rights and any changes that they see deemed fit. And in the diversity hiring, we went over that tonight with Mary Ann. And we can move on, like Jim says, to the next slide. There's a lot of statistical data. Initially, I had in my presentation, we had to cut it down because we'd probably be here till 11 o'clock. I was hoping to keep it in there. I think it was payback because I've been sitting on meetings till midnight. So I was hoping to take over and have you sit here and listen to me for 3 hours, but that's not the point. So we condensed this. This is the last 10 years of use of force. You notice the note at the bottom of this slide says the use of force began in 2015 with accreditation. And what I mean by that is the reporting part of it. And I read that earlier, what that we have to report. It's just about everything. It's not only injury, but just drawing your firearm as well. So you'll see 2015 down on the use of force, third column. That's how many we report. And that includes sometimes just an escort. If we physically put our hands on somebody and put them into what we call maybe an arms restraint, we'll actually fill out a use of force report. The fourth column are those complaints from people. So where there is complaint from anyone saying, hey, I was injured, you cuffed me and the handcuff left a mark on my hand, which is what you'll see at the bottom. In 2019, a white male drunk driving suspect complained about his handcuffing and how he had a mark on his hand after the handcuff. He was very intoxicated. He couldn't even walk. But those two, and then the white male was handcuffed after threatening a teacher at school by our SRO. The complaint there was not that he got hurt. He didn't get hurt at all. Just the fact that he was handcuffed in school. So the parent had a concern. It was legitimate. We spoke with the parent. We met with the parent several occasions. Lieutenant Burrell met with the parent as the professional standards officer who investigated, any of our complaints against personnel. And we just deemed it was a safety aspect. The teachers, he was threatening teachers, and he was getting out of hand. He was at the point where he was going to make a move, so he was handcuffed just to restrain him. You'll notice it was 2 white females and 2 males that made complaints in the last 10 years involving force. And I think it's critical to mention column number 2. We were looking at different numbers. We had originally up there just the amount of arrests. We have 300 to 500 arrests per year, and these are the use of force. And we started to talk about it. Well, what about all our contacts with people, and just have, in the use of force? I think it's imperative to show, we had 11,000 contacts in 2015 and 2 reportable use of forces that were, based on accreditation definition. And that on the right is the result. 2013 was just dropped the other day. The town manager and a couple of us today were talking about the increase in mental health calls. We're not comfortable going to those calls. I'm not going to lie to you, but these are mainly calls where the family calls and begs us that their loved one, their family member, needs help. And if we don't get them help, someone's going to get hurt, probably that person or someone in the house. And that happened in 2013, and the family helped our officers restrain their family member and cuff that family member for transport to a mental health institution. But later, it's like anything else, a couple of weeks later, that person filed a lawsuit, which she later just dropped this year. And that's what the update was there on the right. There was no basis for it. The Rhode Island Interlocal Trust was fighting it, and they successfully did. And the woman finally dropped her suit. And these are, a lot of our suits are coming from these mental health calls. 2014, there happened to be an officer displaying a firearm during a house break, and he did not use the firearm. He drew his firearm because he thought it was a house break, which is not unusual, but he had to fill out a use of force form. Well, actually, he didn't. Now he would have to. In 2014, we were not under accreditation standards at the time, but he would have to fill that out now. But he was exonerated because it was a potential house break. It's not unusual with an officer to draw his firearm. And I already went over the last 2. So I know that we're at the end, and I only have 2 more slides. So
if I can jump in one more time, if we can go back to that slide. I think the thing that struck me most about this statistics here, even in 2019, when there were only 12, incidents of use of force, that's 1 in 1,000 statistically where you've even had hands-on people. And I think that's an impressive statistic, and kind of indicates how little you have to use force.
Yeah, and a lot of those were the mental health, and I would say a lot of those 12 were hands-on, but they weren't, you know, a baton use, a taser, discharge all the time. They were just hands-on, having to get down with somebody and get them handcuffed because they were resisting, but no injuries either. And we can go on to the next slide. And finally, probably the last two slides, this is 2019, the entire year. And what struck me, we ran a lot of these years, we left them all out, but it was amazing that every year is almost exactly the same when it comes to percentages. I could show you 10 years, so we did the last two, and what I mean by that, vehicle stops at the top. If you look at the top, those are race stop totals. The total stops a year are between 3,000 and 4,000 motor vehicle stops per year by the Barrington Police. About 6% per year, no matter what year you run, is that Black, African American. About 86 to 87% are white. Less than 1% Native American, Asian Pacific Island, East Indian, about 2%. These numbers that I'm citing are almost identical every year. With that said, the outcomes, everybody's interested in the outcomes down below. Same thing, every year is almost identical. It's amazing. I don't know how it happens, but motor vehicle citations, 30% given out to Black operator, 34%, almost 35% to the white operator. Then it goes American Indian, 40%, Asian, you can see them. I don't want to quote them all, but those are the numbers everybody's interested in. Then the warnings, again, similar every year. They're almost exact, 65% across the board for warnings. And then the totals at the bottom. And then searched. And all these numbers sent statewide, and it's put into, I believe it's the University of Connecticut or UConn now that's doing the extrapolation of all this data statewide. They throw it into their, you know, correlations and all their other statistical data that they come up with. But this is right out of our system. This is how it prints. We look at this too because of accreditation and state law monthly. The captain and lieutenant behind me look at it monthly. And then we do an annual. We kind of go a little above and beyond because we're smaller. So we'll actually meet 5 sergeants, 2 lieutenants, captain, and myself. There's 8 of us. If that adds up right, getting a little tough at math. That 8 or 9, probably 9 with me. We'll actually look at every officer too. We can get these stats on every individual officer. And we just look at it. We rip them apart to see if there's any trend. And the searches, you'll see that less than 1% for searches. Mostly no searches. You're going to see some departments, if you saw their stats, a lot of searches. You know why? I don't know. It's just, and most of our searches, because if you can look, we can look those up. It's just a smell of an odor of marijuana. A lot of odor of marijuana when we pull vehicles over today. And we all know that's an issue right now because there's no way to test whether they're under the influence of marijuana yet. But I guess that's in the works, almost like a breathalyzer. And someday we'll have that. But the next slide is the same, just a different year. You're going to notice the numbers. Like I said, no matter what year I put up there, this is a good slide because the numbers are a little enlarged. The numbers are down, but this is only 8 months, granted. So there's still 4 months. Plus, you're including 2 or 3 months of COVID. Departments throughout the state went into no one knew what to do. We kind of got away from, well, no one was on the roads for a little while as well. It was very limited. But we kind of went a different way with traffic enforcement for a while. So the numbers are a little down. They're catching up now. We're back to our directed grant patrols. But you'll notice 6%, 86%, the same numbers, right? Going down on percentages. Going to motor vehicle citations. Same thing again, right? About 30% Black, 38% white given tickets, and goes across the board all the way over. And then the searches, 0 and 1 down the bottom, Black, white, Indian, 0 across the board. We had 2 searches on that year, 1 white person, 1 white Hispanic.
So Dino, if I can interrupt one more time. You know, I have heard, and I know some of our council members have heard, that the Barrington police are profiling with their traffic stops. And if you look at those numbers on the top, under race stop totals, it's obvious that there's no profiling going on with the Barrington Police Department. The second question people have is, well, are people treated differently when they're pulled over based on their race? And when you look down at the stop outcome totals, they're all virtually identical between, and I'll use the two largest groups, black and white. Actually, the whites get more citations than the blacks. So, you know, what I see from both of these slides is that equity with the police department in their traffic stops, not only who they pull over, but how those stops are handled when they give citations and when they give warnings. So I think that's what I see. And I'll let the public and the council comment further.
Yeah, obviously 6%. We have to, I don't know if there's, unfortunately, they need to do a study on the traffic going through town. Most of our tickets are given out, not tickets, most of our stops are made on the 114. So, you know, how many, what's the percentage of each race coming through town? Because you can't really go by the makeup of our town when it comes to vehicle stops or arrests. I had another point, but I lost it. Went south out of the mind. So I'm sure we'll have questions. It'll come back to me anyway.
So let's take it back to President Carroll and see how he'd like to proceed from here. Thank you, Dino.
Thank you very much, Chief. I would like to see if any members of the public had anything they wanted to ask or wanted to say. First, I'm going to ask the council members, but I think we'll kind of see how it goes. But I do know a lot of folks want to watch the debate tonight, so let's see if your question is answered. Then let's not ask that question again. Does anyone from the council want to be heard first? Councilor Boyajian. Unmute yourself, I think.
Thanks, Mike. Chief, I really appreciate the presentation. That was very helpful. Hearing it and looking this stuff over, because you sent it out to us in advance, I realized that maybe we're not asking the right question about policing in Barrington, because we would know if we had a excessive use of force problem. It wouldn't escape our attention. We'd hear about it all the time. I'd like you to walk us through prosecution a little bit. I know you said Captain Harrington is a prosecuting officer. When someone's arrested at 2 a.m., who makes the decision of what charges are brought? How is bail determined? And walk me through that. In charges where we remain the prosecuting agency, are we giving pleas to people who lawyer up with sophisticated lawyers and not making the same deal with someone who relies on a public defender? Is that type of stuff something we need to be concerned about? And do you keep statistics on it?
That's a multifaceted question. Well, first of all, I mean, who's in at 2 a.m, the officer in charge, which is generally a sergeant, but not always, the senior officer will make the determination as to charges, but that's always reviewable later by Captain Harrington. As far as, I should have wrote down all your questions, but as far as a PD, or I got to tell you, the public defender, I think are some of the toughest. So I don't think anybody's getting less, in my opinion anyway, and Captain Harrington may chime in, but public defenders represent their clients pretty well, I think.
And I don't mean that to say that they don't, but I'm saying, for example,
no, I understand
if someone gets pulled over with a DUI and says, you know, Bob Mann or Richard Humphreys is coming to represent me, and says, you know, your breathalyzer was unreliable, your blood test was too late, you know, and we say, okay, we're going to drop it, right? Whereas someone else might say, you know, plead out.
No, it's probably the opposite. When we hear Bob Mann or Humphreys is on the case, they're probably having more of a difficult time. We don't drop anything just because of that.
Yeah.
You want to say anything?
No, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, that doesn't happen. I don't know if that's even something people think about, but I don't see it happening at all. We're pretty tough. regardless of the attorneys. I mean, obviously, Humphreys has the DUI, that's his specialty.
Yeah.
Him and his brother, I believe there's a couple of them, right?
Yes,
So
two brothers.
two brothers. And I mean, sometimes there's a mistake made by an officer, and it will be plea bargain down to a reckless driving, but not often at all.
Mhm.
Very, very rare. Very rare. There's other aspects to your question. I don't know if I missed them. So if you want to.
No, I just wondered, do we, we have obviously statistics on arrests, use of force and things like that. Do we keep track of this to see whether or not we're not realizing something about the way we prosecute? And I'm not trying to say that I don't want you to think elected officials need to wade into the prosecution business. There's nothing worse than that. I just want to understand it. Do we know that everyone that we prosecute is getting basically the same treatment? Understanding, you're pressing charges.
Yeah, at least from our department standpoint, I think they're getting the same exact treatment. Now, what happens in different courtrooms at the state level? I mean, every judge is different. That's just a known fact, but I still think they're getting the same treatment. But, some judges may agree to different plea bargains that others won't. And that didn't happen much in the past, but now we have a different judge quite often, right? I hear a lot of complaints about that, and that becomes difficult for us. Before, we always had the same judge, and I can think of his name, I won't say it, and we just used to, their process and how they handle their courtroom. And now, every week you go up there, you're in front of somebody different. It makes that difficult. But as far as from the Barrington Police Department, I think we treat, I think they're all getting treated as much as, like you said, we track it. We do have dispositions. Do we do an annual analysis? We don't, like most of our other things we do. Criminal history so I got a couple of people saying things. So
I'm just saying the criminal history on the offender is obviously going to change the outcome of if it's a plea or if it goes through or if they're going to fight the case. So if you have someone that has their first DUI, they might, DUI and a refusal was typically go together. And if that's the case, it's their first one, they usually, they'll take the refusal. But if you have somebody that's on a second refusal, that's now criminal. It's just, the combination is endless on the comparisons. So it's hard to just nail it down to one, everybody's treated the same because it's based on their criminal history. And, one of the things is the Rhode Island public portal that we use to check criminal history the night that the person's arrested and arraigned. So typically if you get arrested during the 4 to 12 shift, Justice of the Peace will come in, the sergeant or the officer in charge will review the criminal history of the person that was arrested, and many different factors and what could happen. It could be a hold without bail where we have to call, you can't even arraign the person, they have to be sent to the ACI. So we'll have to call the on-call AG, they'll have to sign paperwork that we can take them to the ACI and they'll be brought to the court the next morning. You can have somebody else that it's a first offense. A DUI, typically they're released with their promise to appear in court. So again, it's tough to nail it down to one person because really the person's background and how many times they've been charged with whatever type of offense really dictates the outcome of the prosecution.
So
Going in on DUI, the DUI rate is probably 98% conviction on the minimum sanctions. So not too many people slip out of that.
I just want to clarify for folks who might not know, but when we're talking about hold without bail, that's typically an order that's put in place by another judge based on a prior criminal history. So a judge will call. I can remember prosecuting misdemeanors many years ago, and a judge would go through the call list, and if the defendant didn't appear, the judge would issue an order to hold without bail. That means if this person's picked up on something else, they cannot be released until that person appeared before a judge. So they're going to be held without bail. That's not just a sort of arbitrary decision that we make. That's based on prior criminal history.
Chief, one other question. Well, I saw the list of various trainings you got. I didn't see on there, but I wouldn't be surprised to hear you're doing it. Is there training about substance abuse and addiction and how to handle the prosecution and arrest of these people?
Specifically, any help?
There's pretrial services when they go to court. And
Mhm.
that's what we recommend. If we bring someone in that's highly intoxicated or we know there's a drug history, we'll recommend pretrial services and the court takes care of it from there and they'll monitor it.
Are you talking about officer use?
You had a number of trainings that were up on the board.
Yeah.
And
Right.
one thing that stuck out to me, I know you've been getting mental health calls, and I know just from the blotter that a lot of it is substance abuse. And I
Okay.
guess, as a community, are we doing enough to say, substance abuse, sometimes they can make crimes, but really we have an underlying issue to deal with that we'd prefer to address, in some way that is not, criminal prosecution. It's solving a bigger problem.
Right.
Are we trained to recognize that and to have diversion services and referrals and things like that?
Yeah, in our mental health trainings, we just had a recent 8-hour, it's quite lengthy, 8-hour mental health, and that substance use is probably maybe an hour of that or more on substance use and the issues, underlying issues of that in the population. Yeah, so we are trained in that and to recognize that.
And Steve, just so I could jump in with Captain Harrington.
Yep.
A lot of times it takes the courts and, it could be a domestic violence case. It could be, any version of that where we'll take an arrest to actually force the person into either substance abuse counseling or mental health counseling. So we find that a lot of the times, with the mental health calls that we go on, that the family members are they don't know what to do, and sometimes it leads to the point where the person gets arrested and it's court ordered where they have to go into these facilities or seek treatment. So a lot of times we try our best to reach out with mental health and substance abuse and even domestic violence victims, but sometimes it takes the court to force the action.
Mm-hmm.
Chief, could you explain the department's relationship with Behavioral Health Link and how that's helped support some of our residents?
Yeah, they've been unbelievable in my experience the last
Sitting here tonight.
about a year, right? About a year now. In my prior 33 years, we could never get a mental health agency out with us to a home. We would always they would only come here, and they wouldn't come if the person was under the influence of any substance. BH Link is sitting in the other room now. They just can't, we allow BH Link, there's 3 or 4 police departments that agreed with them. I signed an agreement. They'll use one of our interview rooms. They have a laptop. In the offices, it's been unbelievable because right now, if we get a mental health call, we have a mental health person right here in our station, and they'll go out with us, and they go to the home, which is very unusual. East Bay Mental Health would never go to the home for us. And they have reasons for that, and I understand that, but BH Link comes right out, and they have a facility right in East Providence that they help us out with. They've been a tremendous resource. And again, it's funny you mention that because they are here tonight and sitting right in the other room. They'll be here probably till 1 midnight, 1 in the morning. They spend at least a couple of shifts here a week, BH Link. And I don't know if I'm talking as if everybody knows who they are. I don't know everything about them either, but it's a mental health agency, and they work with the police departments in the East Bay, and they come right out to the scene and interact with, and it's been, like I said, there's nothing better than a police officer being able to say, hey, I have help here. Do you want to speak to someone? And we bring them right into the house, so they'll come back here if they don't want them at the house. We'll allow them to talk with the person here.
And then related, I see the fire chief on. our EMS service, when there's a mental health case, will often do a drop-off at BH Link where they'll treat and then either transport or return to their families. So they've been a great asset to our community on both sides of the public safety.
That's correct.
Couple of other questions I had. Is there a official channel for general complaints about police conduct? I know we went through the use of force complaints, but if someone were to call generally and say, and this is just made up, I think I was racially profiled when you pulled me over, and they called the station, what would you do with that?
Well, everybody here would know what to do. We tell them, if they were to call in via the phone, I'm sure dispatch would put them through the officer in charge. That officer in charge, if not dispatch, would tell them we have a form that they could fill out online. They can get that form. So they can go online. Town hall has them. We have them here. They can come in. The best thing for them to do is actually come right in and speak to someone. But if not, they can get that form online, bring it in, mail it in. And it's done all the time, Steve. I mean, it's pretty accessible. It's here, it's online.
And is that provided then to town hall?
Yes, it's provided by us. But and the other thing I should mention is they don't have to fill that out either. So if that's brought to the attention and enough is told to the officer in charge, we'll look into it. Even if they never come back in, and that's one of the things. I mean, you have to do that, right? I mean, years past, maybe someone would say, well, they didn't come in and fill it out or put the name on it. We're not going to look into it. They don't have to come in. We'll still look into it, to their complaint.
And so you would look into that internally?
Yes.
All right. And would that be
Absolutely.
the professional standards division, or who would handle it?
It's something like that. So no, that could be handled initially right off by the sergeant in charge. And if he's not comfortable with the outcome, that'll be forwarded up to the professional standards.
Okay. And I know you said Lieutenant Burrell. Who else is on the professional standards division?
Technically, that's it.
Okay.
But you bring up a good point I wanted to mention in the slides. We have a new protocol all the chiefs signed on to when it comes to use of force, at least, not racial profiling, but use of force, that the Attorney General will now review any use of force used by an officer throughout the state instead of us internally handling that alone, which I think is critical, and I think is a huge step that's going to help all the chiefs out in all the departments. So we'll have a third-party agency involved in looking at any use of force that may cause an injury. Doesn't have to be lethal, just an injury or report of an injury. They will get involved. But as far as our standards division, it's one officer that does it. But I don't know if to answer your question directly, I mean, we all get involved. I'll get involved. You know, it's not just like one person unit, but in our size departments, they normally are. I did the professional standards investigation for 17 years. Every year that Chief LaCrosse was here, I was the only one. 17 years.
If I could just say, so Steve, if a call comes in, you know, myself, Captain Harrington, Lieutenant Burrell, we'll take it. We'll do the initial, like the chief was saying, we don't have to have, you don't have to fill out a form. If they give us enough information on the initial contact where we can find out a time, a location, you know, we'll review phone calls that come into the station, the officer calling, if there was an incident pulled, and even if there wasn't an incident, there's always a day sheet entry, which is just the basic entry that's made by the dispatcher. So we'll review all that, compile what we can get on just the information if we don't have an official complaint where they actually fill out a form and give us all the information. And then we'll pull an internal investigation report. And at the end of that report, myself, the captain, or Lieutenant Burrell will give our recommendations. And that's then forwarded to the chief with all the evidence that's in there, the phone calls that came into the station, the dispatch radio calls. I'll typically pull the whole call from start to finish. So the dispatch, the initial phone call to the station, and that's all included in the internal investigation report, whether it was founded, unfounded, it's all put together, documented, and then it's
With the
kept
Guardian.
it's in the Guardian tracking system. But we have it, we can review and go back And I'll just touch on the Guardian. So we have our initial police reporting system that we document all our reports, motor vehicle accidents, arrests, our typical incident report. So we'll do it in the two, and this is part of an internal investigation, is a different report. But instead of breaking it down, we'll also add it to that Guardian tracking, which is a separate system, and it's much easier to search for a specific officer. So it will alert us if there's 1, 2, 3, 4 incidents of a complaint, which we don't typically get, to be totally honest with you. But if it was there, we'd be alerted by that system. And again, it's a checks and balance system that we all review. And then quarterly, we will sit through and review all the complaints in the Guardian that's entered into the Guardian tracking. So whether it's, I'll throw in a little dig, not a dig for the chief, but a little for his article. Even something as simple as sick time use or showing up late to work, that's documented in the Guardian tracking system. And then we'll sit down as a command staff and review every incident and look into it. So again, that's done quarterly at our staff meetings. So again, we kind of have two systems as a checks and balance to make sure we catch everything.
Okay. In the Guardian system, does it track, if it's late for work and complaints, does it track whether a particular officer has tended to overcharge people?
Yeah, I think I mentioned that during the, I don't know about overcharging. It would be hard for an officer.
What do you mean overcharge?
Yeah.
Well, so for example, you pull someone over on suspected DUI, but it's a refusal case. And in the process of arresting him, he also gets charged with assaulting a police officer. And come time for trial, assaulting a police officer is dismissed because there's no evidence to support it. But he pleads it out as a DUI because he doesn't want to go to trial on assaulting a police officer. Do you have any way to track that overcharging, meaning an officer is, potentially arresting someone on a more minor charge, throwing in a more serious charge to leverage a plea, so that this person is threatened with what is a substantial ding on their criminal record?
So I'll give you two answers to that. One would be the supervisor or the sergeant or the lieutenant that would be working that night would check that before the charges are entered. They review the case. So that's our first checkpoint. The person in charge of the shift. What do you have for charges? Okay, tell me what happened tonight. We had an intoxicated driver. He reached for my firearm and began to wrestle with me. Okay. Now from that, the use of force report is pulled. That's going to be added into the Guardian tracking because it's a use of force. As the chief was saying before on the early warning system, the disorderly conduct, that's the typical thing that you want to look for, because it's a charge that you want to hold in your pocket. And if you have an officer that's using that charge, it's typically the easy charge to throw in to do exactly what you're talking about. And that would be picked up in that tracking system. It would.
Okay. And my last question was about the statistics that were up. I saw that the citations and the searches were relatively uniform across all races, and like you said, from year to year. I did notice that Black and Hispanic people who were pulled over were about 3 to 5 times more likely to be arrested, but no more likely to be searched. And I'm trying to figure out what accounts for that. Is that
Most of those arrests are for suspended licenses, which is not a custody arrest. They're just summoned at the scene and released.
okay?
That's what's cutting down on the searches.
Okay, and so it shows up as an arrest, but not a search because.
It's a technical arrest. Yes.
Okay.
So just so I can, at that point, as the chief said, a lot of our traffic stops are done on 114, and we have officers that are out there and they just sit and look for inspection stickers, registration decals, and if they see a bad registration decal or a bad inspection sticker, they'll run the plate, and typically, if you have a lapsed registration decal, you're going to have a lapsed. Chances are greater that you're going to have a lapsed license also, or a suspended license. And as the captain said, that's an arrestable offense. So it's more the violation of an inspection sticker or a plate, inspection registration tab that's expired. That's stopping that's initiating the initial stop, and that's where you get a lot of suspendeds from that.
All right, great. I appreciate your time, all of you. This has been very helpful, and thanks for answering those questions.
Thank you.
Other members of the council? Yes, Councilor Herman. We need to unmute.
Put that one down there.
Thanks. Thank you, Chief, for being so thorough tonight. I noticed that you have a lot of the car data. Do you have data on pedestrians walking through town, and if your police officers, as a matter of course, in the evenings or during the night, are pulling or stopping people that are walking through town? Do you have any statistics on that?
No. We could work with it. Yeah, we could probably work on that and try to compile some of that.
I'd be interested in that, and wonder what kind of script the police officers might use if they were coming up to somebody at 1:30 in the morning, kind of walking through town, either walking home. Like what they would say, if they're seeing somebody in town walking.
Again, you could have a million different scenarios of why you'd stop somebody. If we have a rash of car breaks, which we typically have, right now we have a month or two ago we had a car theft ring of gangs from out of state coming in. A vehicle was stolen, a motorcycle was stolen. So if we have someone that's in an area and we have that type of activity going on, they would use that for a stop. There's a million different scenarios of why someone could be stopped walking at 1:30 in the morning. It's tough to say, but
and a lot of times they may not be stopped, Joe.
They may not be stopped.
I mean, I've been on duty before, drove by a million people, 1 in the morning, never even stopped. But generally it would be pull up, everything all right, how you doing? Something as simple as that. And normally within the first 30 seconds, believe it or not, so if I pull up to you and say, how are you? It's going 2 ways right after that, based on that initial answer, if it's just a neighbor out for a walk or someone that just can't sleep, and they tell you usually, and then just go on your way and say, oh, have a good night. But
you don't keep track of those conversations. That's not a detail that you would.
No.
If they're searched or something else
further,
it would be tracked. But me stopping and saying hi to somebody walking on the road is community policing to us. We try to talk to everybody that's out, and we try to make ourselves approachable. And the guys that work and the ladies that work midnight to 8, they're always looking for someone to talk to. So if they're out, like the chief would say, more than likely, if it's non-suspicious and they're driving by with the windows open, it's just, hi, how you doing? What's going on tonight? If you want to talk to me, you're more than welcome. If you don't, you can go on your way.
Okay, thank you.
Any other members of the council? Okay. Members of the public, do you have questions or comments for Chief? Susanna Holloway would like to be heard. So if we can unmute her, please.
Hi, thank you so much for having this. I really, really appreciate it. So I live in Barrington, and I have maybe 3 or 4 concerns partly from what I've heard tonight, and partly from what I was thinking about before tonight's meeting. Okay, from what I've heard tonight, let me just say two things. One, about talking to people who are walking at night, that I'm not so sure about that, because I think we need to be very careful about people who do not know that they are free to leave. I know that I'm free to leave. I know that I'm not under arrest when a police officer comes up to me and you use the word stop. Do you stop somebody? Because if you stop somebody, maybe they're not free to leave. And if they're not free to leave, they are under arrest. So we have to be very careful about that. I've been trained as a lawyer, and I've worked for many years at the Attorney General's office in North Carolina. So I know about this, but a lot of people don't. And I think it can be very intimidating. And that is certainly how many police forces in North Carolina operate. The other thing that's intimidating is having a police officer, one of our Barrington officers, sitting in a car at the side of Route 114 and looking for expired registration stickers. How on earth is that helping police in Barrington? A lot of these police, the community in Barrington, a lot of these people are not Barrington residents. Why do we care? Why do we care that it leads, it's probably evidence of some other crime like an expired license? A lot of African-American men get arrested and put in jail for expired licenses. Do we really care about that?
No, they don't. Not for expired licenses.
Oh, in North Carolina, yes, they do.
Oh, that's exactly, not in Barrington.
Well, how nice. I still think it's an intimidation, and it doesn't make me feel like my police force is really doing much to help keep me safe. It seems like, I mean, it just seems like a huge waste of time. Unless there's been something like you were talking about, a spree of robberies, or, you know, there's some reason to be looking for, you know, this suspect vehicle. But I would really like to have some type of citizen review committee in Barrington for how we're spending our tax dollars with our policing. That also brings me to an incident that I had at the beach back in June during coronavirus, when I was concerned about how the lifeguard, on the very first day the beach was open, the lifeguard was having to lean into the car windows and put on the stickers. And I wrote to Jim Cunha about this. I wrote to the town council about this. I thought we could do a better job of protecting our teenage lifeguards because of coronavirus, and the town came up with really good ways that the teenage lifeguards could handle that. But when I was there at the beach that day, and there was a police officer sitting in his car watching me talking to the teenage lifeguard and his manager and saying, can't we try to come up with something that seems a little safer? And I went over to the officer and I asked for his input very politely. I stood far away from his cruiser, and he turned to me and he said, I don't work for you. And I said, well, I'm a resident of Barrington. I don't work for you. I'll give you back your 10 cents. That was rude and intimidating. And I did not know that I had this avenue to register, you know, just a mild concern and complaint. He didn't pull a taser on me. He didn't pull his gun. He didn't hurt me. But it was so rude. And he does work for me. That was a lie. Okay. Then this brings me to the other idea of sunshine and accountability. When you talk about all these records and reporting for the accreditation, how many of those records and reporting and personnel files of individual officers are public?
Well, personnel files are not public by state law.
Well,
State law, and that's not up to us. So in terms of the statistics and so forth, those are public. And I mean, I could let Chief answer, but and in terms of a civilian review board, the town council does each month get a listing report from all the department heads, including the police chief, which lists a number of different pieces of information. We don't do a deep dive into things like this, where we've asked the chief to compile all kinds of statistics and present them, not just to us, but to others as often, but we are doing that now. I don't know that, but I mean, that's where we are. We've got 5 civilians, who, I should say 6 civilians, because our manager also reviews the police department. I should move on though, just to make sure that other folks have a chance to
Thank you.
ask questions.
Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else from the public like to ask a question or make a comment? And I'm looking for hands or some indication from folks. I don't see anyone else who wants to be heard. Okay.
Mike, I see Wafa Frisch.
Oh, I didn't see you there. Yes, Ms. Frisch.
Yes, thank you. Is there an intention for the town to increase the hour of the BH Link at the station, the BH Link staff?
Yeah, I should have explained, Waffer. Even though they're only here those 2 nights, they're still available. So if they're in Warren, if they're at the Warren Police tomorrow night, they still come to Barrington if we need them.
Okay, okay. And do they go out on the call, or you have to contact them? Like, how do they know that they need to be on the site or on the scene?
Yeah, they can be called at any time
Okay,
and they'll respond.
all right, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. Ms. Holloway, did I get to all of your questions? Okay, great. Anyone else from the council like to say anything? Well,
Jerry's going to slow it down.
We do, so given the public, I guess we've gone through public comment, the questions and answers. Does anyone have anything they wanted to say about anything else? Okay, great. Well, Chief, thank you and your command staff very much for putting this together and for answering.
Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt. Ms. Frage has her hand up one more time.
I'm sorry. I know I had a turn, but I have a question. I don't know if this is for the chief police or maybe for the town as a community or the town council. In the town, we had, I would say, at least 3 or 4 young men, young people who overdosed in the last few years. And I'm sure most of you, you guys know about this. So I'm just curious. I know we have the Bay team. Is there anything that the town planned to do to prevent such overdoses? Because we just lost someone maybe 2 weeks ago who's in their early 20s.
So thank you. That's a very good question. I would say, first of all, that our police officers now carry, I'm not sure if it's actually called Narcan or something else. Is that correct, Chief, that you've got the officers have Narcan?
Yes, Mike, well, could you go with that again?
So I understand that Ms. Frage is asking, I think, more about substance abuse prevention, but I just thought it was worthwhile to ask. The police officers now carry Narcan in the vehicles, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's in addition to our EMTs who have much more powerful ways to address this as well. But in terms of kind of early interventions and things like that, we do have the Bay team, and they do a fantastic job. They work within our schools and with our school committee to do a lot of teaching about this, because I think, as Councilor Boyajian has said, you can kind of look back at your class if you went to high school here and think of kids who've, friends of yours who've had problems and substance abuse issues and really struggled with it. So we're trying to do that at a very early stage using the Bay team, and the school department is doing that as well. We also have the juvenile justice. When a minor is arrested on a possession charge or something like that, they can be, in the normal course, sort of the default is that they would go to family court to be charged. We have a juvenile hearing board, and Kate Weymouth has been instrumental in this and works very closely with them. This is a confidential board that really, it acts as an early intervention. It's an opportunity for citizens to get together to, identify a kid who made a knuckleheaded teenager mistake, or a kid who's got a problem that may need an intervention. So that's an opportunity for us to do that as well, without developing some kind of criminal record or anything like that. I'm not aware of other programs that we have in town, but folks can feel free to correct me. Ms. Rage.
Yeah, what I would like to see, I guess, is a program, or maybe the Bay team put some work with the young adults who graduate, especially from the high school, and about to head to college or come back from college. And unfortunately, those 3 young people who actually lost their lives, it happened after they graduated from high school. So I really appreciate the Bay team, but I'm not sure if as a town we can come up with a program where we can target those at-risk folks that we know that they struggled with substance use. And I know we're not the parents or the guardians, but if there is a community-oriented program, I think that would help.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Breyer is on the call, is at this meeting, and he's the liaison to the Bay team, so I'm sure he's going to be raising that with them. They're sort of the natural group to do this, because they don't just deal with it's adult youth, Barrington adult youth. So it is certainly something that they could sort of a natural path to that. But that's a good suggestion. There's someone on the phone who I guess we can ask to unmute. I see their hand is up. It's 396-6707. Please, go ahead. Oh, I see a hand up, but okay, we can move on. Any other hands? Okay, I think that's it. And we're just in time for folks who want to watch the debates. Again, thank you very much, and thanks to the members of the public for coming and posing these questions, both here and to the chief. As I said at the beginning, the Barrington Police is professional, and so professionals aren't afraid of questions and critiques. They either are already addressing those issues, as we often found, or they're pleased to find an area that they can work on, because this is really their craft and their profession. And this is not to be the last of these conversations, but it's a really important first step. So with that,
Can I just add one thing real quick? And kind of to Ms. Holloway's point, if you run into an officer that you think is acted inappropriately, they've got their badge number on their uniform. And I'm sure the chief would be more than happy to hear what you have to say and what transpired and be able to run that down to ground. So don't ever feel that there's not an open ear awaiting your complaint, because we want to make, they are the best police department in the state, but we still want to make them better.
Would anyone on the council like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion to adjourn has been made. Seconded by Kate Wing.
Second.
Okay. I think we can do it without a roll call. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.